Giovanni, qualcosa da dire prima di iniziare? Tutto...
No, sta funzionando tutto, sto avviando in questo momento il YouTube, quindi tra un minuto o due siamo anche su YouTube. Ecco, ora siamo già su YouTube.
Hi Renate,
Ciao, ciao di Francoforte a tutti. Ciao Mauro.
bene, ciao, ciao. Eh, Ciao Andrea,
Ciao Mauro,
buon pomeriggio.
anche a te.
Abbiamo
Eccomi qua.
provato alcuni video che proietteremo durante la sessione di oggi.
Bene.
Bene, per il momento tutto scorre
Sì, mi pare che
regolarmente.
sia...
Ecco.
Tanto complimenti per gli oltre 1200 iscritti, quindi...
Grazie, è stato totalmente impensabile.
Beh, insomma, adesso diciamo, nel male della pandemia, il fatto di stare a distanza consente, come sempre, a qualche persona in più di collegarsi, insomma.
Sì, infatti.
L'ordine è quello che hai diffuso, sì. Va bene, quindi comincia il rettore, poi gli altri a
però
seguire.
non si è ancora collegato, tanto speriamo che si colleghi.
Chiama la segreteria del rettore, chiamala la segreteria.
Ecco, perché ho provato a chiamarla anche stamani, mi hanno assicurato, però adesso...
Ah beh, allora se ti hanno assicurato...
ma per scrupolo...
Va bene, io mi eclisso e riappaio quando mi dai la parola.
Adesso arriva anche il rettore. Hi Matilde.
Ciao Mauro. Hello everyone.
Hello. Ecco. Ancora non c'è.
Aspetto il rettore o vado comunque con la sigla? Sono le 3.
Aspettiamo un secondo il rettore.
Va bene.
Ha detto che ci sarebbe collegato aspettiamo magari.
Mauro, è arrivato il rettore.
Eccolo, ecco, sì. Dunque, io però non lo vedo. Giovanni, lo vedi il rettore?
Un attimo, Mauro, ho capito, c'è un piccolo problema, un attimo solo.
Eccolo, sì. Benissimo. Allora, possiamo cominciare. Laura, se vuoi inviare il video. Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, depending on your country. I'm Mauro Guerrini, professor in Library Information Science at the University of Florence, Italy, and a member of the IFLA Bibliography section, chair of the conference. Welcome to the International Conference on Bibliographic Control in the Digital Ecosystem. Now we screen 3 videos by 3 promoters: University of Florence, Italian Library Association, and IFLA. Please, Laura. The conference is promoted by the University of Florence under the aegis of the IFLA Bibliographic section with the Italian Library Association, with the Archival and Bibliographic Superintendency of Tuscany, Italy, Casalini Libri, European University Institute, Central Institute for the Union Catalogue of Italian Libraries, Italian Publishers Association, J. Lees Full Stop IT, National Library of Florence, National Library of Rome, National Library of Swiss, University of Florence with the library system and sagas department, Vatican Library and Wikimedia. Thanks to the partners, Italian Library Association Tuscany Section, Casalini Libri, OCLC, Space. During the conference, we will screen short presentation videos of our partners. On the website powered by the library system of the University of Florence, in particular by Claudia Buratelli and Andrea Urbini, you can read the speaker's bio and the previews of their papers. Attendees are currently 1,277, representing 62 different countries in the world. The proceedings will be published by the journal J. Lees Full IT. The university is a journal, academic journal of the University of Florence Department Sagas, issue number 1, 2022. Thanks to the staff, in particular to Giovanni Bergamin, Carlotta Arbigiano, Laura Manzoni, and Claudia Buratelli. This conference is dedicated to the memory of Carlo Revelli, an Italian librarian who died a few months ago, who was very interesting in cataloging and in every question of libraries. I'm introducing for an open welcome Professor Luigi Dei, Rector of the University of Florence. Please, Luigi.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am very glad to introduce this conference on the Universal Bibliographic Control. I would like to thank Professor Mauro Guerrini for having invited me to give these welcome remarks, and please accept the warmest greetings and wishes by the University of Florence. It's always a great pleasure for a rector of a big university where almost every discipline is cultivated to participate to the opening ceremony of an international meeting. Indeed, looking at the various programs of these meetings, it's possible sharing the great horizons, the frontiers of the advanced research in the various domains of the research. In particular, you will discuss about the themes that truly permeate some important aspects of many topics dealing with cataloging, libraries, and so on. As you well know, bibliographic control is radically changing because the bibliographic universe is radically changing. Resources, agents, technologies, standards, and practices. In this view, libraries play a fundamental role in the digital ecosystem. Your conference will address many topics, as the new bibliographic universe, library cooperation networks, the legal deposit, national bibliographies, bibliographic agencies, new control tools and standards, authority control and new alliances, new ways of indexing documents by means of artificial intelligence, machine learning, text mining, and so on. role of the thesauri and ontologies in the digital ecosystem. Let me express gratitude to all the speakers who will participate to this meeting that is held due to the pandemic at a distance by virtual meetings. I'm sure that the debate and the discussion that will take place during the meeting allows to stimulate new ideas for future research projects and possibly generate interesting partnerships among different research groups and individuals. I believe one of the most positive aspects of such meetings is the possibility, thanks to the human contacts, to establish interactions and contaminating some different knowledges on similar subjects. Unfortunately, the social distancing due to the pandemic has removed that wonderful aspect of conferences, which is to socialize. But I want to hope that this year can be the Renaissance year for meetings where people start again to be in presence. I am sure that the level of the contributions in this meeting will be very high, and I hope you can continue to study and work at your universities, research centers, libraries, private or public institutions with a renovated will to improve the knowledge and develop new research strategies. My best wishes for a fruitful and good conference, and I am very sad not to being able to invite you enjoying with the cultural heritage beauties of our city. Thank you very much for your attention and my best wishes for the success of your meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Luigi. Thank you, our rector. And now is welcome by Luca Bellingeri, Director of the National Library of Florence. Please, Luca.
Care colleghe e cari colleghi, questo mio saluto avrebbe dovuto accogliervi nei locali della Biblioteca Nazionale, dove era previsto si dovesse svolgere una delle giornate di questo convegno. La terribile pandemia che ha ormai da circa un anno ha investito tutto il mondo, necessariamente ha trasformato questo importante appuntamento in un incontro solo virtuale. E così anche la nostra accoglienza alla Nazionale di Firenze deve oggi limitarsi a questo collegamento da remoto e al breve video sull'istituto che vedrete nel corso dei lavori che è presente sul sito del convegno. Quando più di un anno fa ci fu chiesto di aderire come ente promotore al comitato scientifico e alla realizzazione di questo convegno, fu naturale accogliere con convinzione questa proposta. Da sempre, infatti, il controllo bibliografico ha costituito uno dei principali compiti di questa biblioteca. Fin da quando, in base all'articolo 62 del regolamento delle biblioteche governative del 1885, pochi mesi dopo, nel gennaio 1886, su impulso dell'allora direttore Desiderio Chilovi, nacque il bollettino bibliografico delle pubblicazioni italiane ricevute per diritto di stampa, poi trasformatosi nel 1958 nella attuale Bibliografia Nazionale Italiana. Nel tempo, poi, i servizi bibliografici nazionali, che è bene ricordarlo costituiscono una delle finalità istituzionali del Ministero di cui facciamo parte, cioè il Ministero dei Beni Culturali, Ambientali e del Turismo, si sono ulteriormente arricchiti e differenziati, avendo sempre come punto di riferimento proprio questo istituto. Così, fin dal 1925, le descrizioni del bollettino vengono corredate anche di un accesso relativo all'argomento trattato, con l'intenzione di poter giungere, attraverso la collaborazione con altre istituzioni bibliotecarie nazionali, alla creazione di un indice nazionale dei soggetti. Abbandonato questo ambizioso progetto, Negli anni successivi alla Seconda Guerra Mondiale, nel 1956 si giunge tuttavia alla pubblicazione del Soggettario di Firenze, sostituito nel 2007 dal nuovo Soggettario, del quale proprio in questi mesi è imminente la pubblicazione di una nuova edizione, incentrato su un thesaurus che ormai conta oltre 66.000 termini. Ma poiché, come ci ricorda questo convegno, l'universo bibliografico è cambiato radicalmente negli ultimi decenni, soprattutto in conseguenza del diffondersi delle tecnologie digitali, anche il ruolo della nazionale in tema di servizi bibliografici ha dovuto modificarsi. Così, come previsto dall'articolo 6 del decreto che ha assegnato la piena autonomia all'istituto, un decreto del 2008, e che tra i compiti che assegna a questo istituto ha anche individuato quello di effettuare ricerche e studi e attuare le procedure per la conservazione nel lungo periodo delle risorse digitali, fin dal 2010 la biblioteca, in stretta collaborazione con Nazionale Roma e Biblioteca Marciana, si è fatta carico di curare il progetto Magazzini Digitali, finalizzato al deposito, la conservazione e l'accessibilità nel lungo periodo delle risorse native digitali o prodotte nell'ambito di progetti di digitalizzazione. E nel marzo 2018, sempre proseguendo lungo questo filone, la biblioteca ha avviato, in forma per il momento solo prototipale, il servizio di raccolta e conservazione di alcuni siti web di interesse culturale. Nelle prossime giornate, quasi 50 relatori affronteranno il tema dei nuovi confini del controllo bibliografico alla luce delle profonde modifiche introdotte in questo universo dallo scenario di un sistema digitale. Uno scenario nel quale le biblioteche, siamo certi, continueranno a rivestire un ruolo di primissimo piano e ancor più che in passato, fondamentale sarà operare secondo una logica di cooperazione e condivisione, indispensabile per poter affrontare adeguatamente queste nuove e ambiziose sfide. Su questa convinzione si sono basate del resto anche in passato molte delle scelte fondamentali compiute dalla Nazionale di Firenze. La scelta di aderire, prima in Italia, al nascente Servizio Bibliotecario Nazionale, SBN, avviando la catalogazione informatizzata fin dal 1985 e collegandosi all'indice già dall'anno successivo. La scelta di coinvolgere numerosissime istituzioni, non sempre, non necessariamente di ambito bibliotecario, nello sviluppo del nuovo soggettario, al quale collaborano ormai da anni istituti come il CNR, la Crusca e ovviamente molte altre biblioteche. La Galleria degli Uffizi, ampliando l'orizzonte anche al settore delle arti. La decisione di attivare forme di collaborazione anche con realtà apparentemente appartenenti ad altri ambiti, così per il progetto di collaborazione con Wikimedia, oppure con la partecipazione attiva al MAB, che è il coordinamento dei musei, archivi e biblioteche, che risale ormai a oltre 5 anni fa. Fino alla scelta, più recente, di rendere la bibliografia nazionale italiana libera e gratuita, attraverso la pubblicazione in PDF, Unimark e XML sul proprio sito, dal 2015, o, ancora più di recente, dal 2017, di sperimentare la possibilità di rendere partecipi della sua produzione, secondo criteri di suddivisione geografici o disciplinari, altre importanti realtà bibliotecarie del nostro Paese: la Nazionale Centrale di Roma, la Biblioteca Centrale Giuridica, la Biblioteca Europea di Informazione e Cultura, la BEIC, di Milano. Se parte di tutto questo è stato possibile in un ambiente ancora largamente analogico, certamente un sistema digitale non può che confermare questa esigenza e rafforzare questa mia personale convinzione dell'assoluta necessità di procedere in un'ottica di cooperazione. Nell'attesa dunque di ascoltare quanto emergerà da queste dense giornate di lavori e per non rubare altro tempo con questo mio saluto, non mi rimane a questo punto che salutarvi e augurare a tutti un buon lavoro.
Thank you, Luca. And every speech is a level of in the folder, and every attendees can read every contribution in English too. Please now, Andrea De Pasquale, Director of the National Library of Rome. Please, Andrea.
Bene, buon pomeriggio a tutti. Ringrazio innanzitutto gli organizzatori del convegno e saluto sia a titolo personale che a nome della Biblioteca Nazionale Centrale di Roma i relatori e i tanti partecipanti che da ogni parte del mondo hanno voluto onorarci della loro presenza, seppur virtuali in questo momento di particolare che stiamo vivendo. Il controllo bibliografico, inteso come processo di censimento delle pubblicazioni, che inizia dal momento in cui l'editore pubblica il libro e prosegue con la sua distribuzione nelle varie fasi della presa in carico, catalogazione, indicizzazione e messa in fruizione da parte della biblioteca, è cambiato radicalmente nel corso dell'ultimo decennio. Parlare oggi di controllo bibliografico significa innanzitutto inevitabilmente parlare anche di controllo bibliografico digitale, anche se la realizzazione organica di un controllo bibliografico pienamente inserito in un ecosistema digitale è tuttora in corsa e mi spiace affermare che purtroppo l'Italia è ancora indietro rispetto ad altri paesi di qualche anno, anche se numerose iniziative recenti sono volte a colmare questa lacuna. Tra i compiti della Biblioteca Nazionale Centrale di Roma vi è innanzitutto quello di conservare e valorizzare la produzione editoriale italiana nazionale insieme alla Biblioteca Nazionale Centrale di Firenze attraverso l'Istituto del Deposito Legale e proprio anche riguardante la valorizzazione che rientra nei suoi compiti istituzionali, un posto di rilievo è ricoperto dal controllo bibliografico, che oggi più che mai deve tener conto sia del contesto internazionale sia ovviamente dell'ambiente digitale. Un'importante risorsa con grandi potenzialità, oltre a tutti ai progetti già ricordati dal collega Bellingeri, mi piace sottolineare il portale della Biblioteca Digitale della Biblioteca Nazionale di Roma. Un portale che raccoglie in un unico luogo i progetti di digitalizzazione nazionali e internazionali a cui ha partecipato la Biblioteca Nazionale. Oggi attualmente sono presenti in questo portale circa 19 milioni di immagini che appartengono alle collezioni più importanti e significative della biblioteca, ma soprattutto un posto di rilievo spetta all'emeroteca digitale, che contiene oltre 2500 testate di quotidiani, periodici e giornali storici, consultabili gratuitamente in linea anche nel rispetto del diritto d'autore, quindi una risorsa delle più ricche d'Italia per le collezioni periodiche disponibili in rete. Anzi, essa è costantemente arricchita anche grazie ad una costante campagna di digitalizzazione e anche ad una conversione specifica con il Senato della Repubblica Italiana, volta a creare proprio una vera e propria emeroteca nazionale, riprendendo l'antica vocazione della Biblioteca Nazionale Centrale di Roma, che risale agli inizi del Novecento, che la investiva già del ruolo di creare e costituire l'emeroteca nazionale. Mi piace anche ricordare altre iniziative, oltre al progetto Google Books, che ha visto la Biblioteca Nazionale di Roma coordinatrice delle altre biblioteche in questa importante campagna di digitalizzazione che ha portato alla messa a disposizione di oltre 340.000 volumi digitalizzati e fino a per un totale di oltre 20 milioni di pagine. Vorrei sottolineare l'attenzione che la Biblioteca Nazionale ha da sempre rivolto per il censimento del patrimonio antico italiano, degli incunaboli in particolare, dei libri del XV secolo, che risale già ai tempi del censimento nazionale IGI, Indice Generale degli Incunaboli, il primo censimento partecipato europeo, che oggi si è trasformato grazie al progetto della fondazione, finanziato dalla Fondazione Polonsky, in una prospettiva digitale, cioè è partita, ormai è stato realizzato il primo step, la digitalizzazione degli incunaboli italiani, a partire da quelli conservati nella biblioteca dello storico monastero di Santa Scolastica di Subiaco, dove è nata la stampa in Italia. Cito anche ancora il progetto attualmente in corso, perché riguarda tante collezioni, Italia Books, il primo censimento digitale dei libri ebraici d'Italia. Un progetto a cui teniamo particolarmente, un progetto di cooperazione dell'Unione delle comunità ebraiche italiane, della Biblioteca Nazionale di Roma e della Biblioteca Nazionale di Israele, che al termine porterà alla catalogazione completa dei libri ebraici italiani fino agli anni quasi contemporanei, fino agli anni 60, presenti in 14 comunità ed in 25 istituzioni culturali. La Biblioteca Nazionale Centrale di Roma parteciperà all'interessante dibattito che si svilupperà in questi giorni attraverso 2 interventi che affrontano 2 aspetti diversi ma complementari del controllo bibliografico in ambiente digitale. Il primo riguarda il deposito digitale e la fruizione degli ebooks, nato dalla collaborazione con gli editori del gruppo Giunti e Mondadori. E l'altro progetto riguarda invece le riviste digitali e digitalizzate in Italia. È stato possibile affrontare il tema del censimento di queste pubblicazioni native digitali o digitalizzate, realizzando ben 12.000 schede di riviste italiane disponibili su internet ad accesso libero, creando un progetto dal titolo Ridi. Credo quindi che l'importante convegno di oggi e dei prossimi giorni possa offrire ampi spunti di riflessione e di approfondimento e possa davvero segnare un momento fondamentale nella storia del dibattito biblioteconomico italiano. Ringrazio quindi ancora una volta gli organizzatori e auguro di cuore a tutti buon lavoro.
Grazie. Thank you for your welcome. And now Simonetta Butteau, Director of the Central Institute for the Union Catalogue of Italian Libraries. Please, Simonetta.
Grazie, buon pomeriggio a tutti. Intanto grazie a Mauro Guerrini per l'invito e grazie anche al comitato organizzatore, alla segreteria composta da Carlotta Alpigiano, Laura Manzoni, Claudia Burattelli e dall'amico Giovanni Bergamin, che in questi mesi hanno svolto un lavoro magnifico di costante raccordo, di creazione di costanti raccordi fra noi tutti, e resi ancora più difficili da questo difficile momento storico caratterizzato proprio invece dalla distanza, dall'isolamento. E come Istituto Centrale per il Catalogo Unico delle biblioteche italiane noi abbiamo accolto con grande entusiasmo la proposta di fare parte degli enti promotori di questo convegno molto interessante, perché il tema che affrontiamo oggi e che affronteremo nei prossimi giorni riguarda da vicino lo sviluppo futuro dei servizi bibliografici nazionali e la possibilità di condividere all'interno della comunità delle biblioteche nuovi e più incisivi modelli operativi. Come sapete, l'ICU ha al centro della sua missione istituzionale la gestione del catalogo collettivo nazionale, SBN, che si arricchisce ogni giorno grazie al lavoro delle 6.600 biblioteche di ogni tipologia e di diversa appartenenza amministrativa che insieme partecipano alla catalogazione collettiva del patrimonio bibliografico italiano. L'ICU governa il catalogo di SBN tenendolo allineato con i principi nazionali e internazionali di catalogazione e assicura l'infrastruttura tecnologica per tutti i servizi bibliografici nazionali. Per il numero e la varietà delle istituzioni partner per il volume delle informazioni che offre, per la sua vita ultra trentennale, SBN rappresenta oggi anche uno strumento per il controllo bibliografico universale, che si rivela da una parte di grande utilità per gli utenti che ottengono per il suo tramite notizie certe sulla produzione bibliografica italiana, e dall'altra anche per la comunità stessa delle biblioteche, che a partire dall'analisi dei dati presenti in catalogo, opere, autori, editori, possono orientare con maggiore consapevolezza le loro scelte di politica culturale. Centrale nella missione istituzionale dell'Istituto è dunque il lavoro che garantisce la qualità dei dati del catalogo. L'ICU persegue da sempre questo obiettivo attraverso lo studio, la traduzione, la diffusione di normative nazionali e internazionali, l'elaborazione di linee guida, un fitto programma di attività formative. Ma le nuove sfide del futuro impongono una dimensione cooperativa sempre più marcata con le due biblioteche nazionali centrali, come ovvio, ma anche con analoghe istituzioni che operano nel mondo degli archivi e dei musei, e grazie anche a un più fitto confronto a livello internazionale. Avremo modo di parlare di questi argomenti nel corso dei lavori dei prossimi giorni. Mi preme però qui sottolineare il fatto che mai come ora è emerso quanto l'analisi dei dati di autorità e i confronti fra questi dati stiano assumendo un ruolo sempre più importante e strategico per lo sviluppo dei servizi alla comunità che l'ICU si impegna a migliorare anche in una dimensione internazionale. Sul tema del controllo d'autorità, da oltre 10 anni l'ICU partecipa al VIAF, Virtual International Authority File, progetto internazionale gestito da OCLC, che consente di collegare voci di autorità controllate provenienti dai cataloghi nazionali di molte importanti biblioteche del mondo, e dal 2009 l'ICU ha inviato annualmente al VIAF solo voci di autorità di altissimo livello insieme ai titoli collegati, che sono così confluiti nei cluster di autorità contenenti tutte le forme del nome adottate dalle varie istituzioni partecipanti. Non escludiamo tuttavia una revisione a breve di questa regola molto restrittiva, alla quale stiamo pensando, in parte anche su sollecitazione della comunità Wiki, con la quale collaboriamo su vari temi, grazie a una convenzione firmata con Wikimedia Italia nel marzo del 2015, e in particolare con Wikidata, in quanto punto di raccordo di moltissimi identificativi di nomi personali e collettivi provenienti da molteplici produttori di dati, quindi non solo di ambito bibliotecario. Più recentemente, a supporto degli stessi obiettivi, a luglio del 2020, l'Istituto, in quanto agenzia catalografica nazionale, è entrato a far parte della comunità ISNI, International Standard Name Identifier, come agenzia di registrazione per i partecipanti alla rete SBN, insieme a biblioteche nazionali e istituzioni catalografiche di tutto il mondo. L'agenzia internazionale ISNI assegna un numero identificativo unico e persistente a ogni nome che abbia una relazione di responsabilità nei confronti di un'opera o di una sua manifestazione o espressione, disambiguando eventuali casi di omonimia. Si occupa inoltre di diffondere gli identificativi assegnati nei repertori e cataloghi associati a livello nazionale e internazionale, eliminando il potenziale rischio di ambiguità nell'attribuzione delle corrette relazioni di responsabilità. L'ISNI dunque assume un ruolo fondamentale nel collegamento di domini diversi, soprattutto nelle applicazioni dei linked data e del semantic web. In un contesto che si basa proprio sulla creazione di cluster di dati che riconoscano e valorizzino le differenze invece di appiattirle, SBN diventa la guida e il nucleo centrale del progetto di punta dell'ICU, che dopo 2 anni ormai di studio si avvia finalmente a conclusione e che speriamo di presentare prima dell'estate. Si tratta di SRI, il sistema di ricerca integrato che interessa tutte le basi dati gestite dall'ICCU, compresa la Digital Library di Internet culturale, alla quale partecipano ovviamente molte biblioteche italiane, e sarà accessibile al pubblico grazie al portale Alfabetica, che ne costituisce il punto di accesso unico. Come sentirete dall'intervento che vi proporranno le mie colleghe nei prossimi giorni, Alfabetica è un portale di nuova concezione, pensato come piattaforma di recupero delle informazioni provenienti da tutti i nostri database, al fine di renderli interrogabili in simultanea, grazie all'indice SBN, che funzionerà come catalizzatore delle richieste e come attrattore delle informazioni provenienti dagli altri database, proprio a partire da liste di autorità controllate e da voci di soggetto. Per navigare nel nuovo portale avremo a disposizione delle chiavi di ricerca mirate a definire dei contesti, i protagonisti, le biblioteche, i luoghi, oppure menu dedicati ad alcune tipologie di materiali, libri, periodici, manoscritti, grafica, musica, cartografia, audiovisivi, che consentano di ricevere risposte esaurienti provenienti da SBN e dalle basi dati specialistiche del libro antico, dei manoscritti antichi e moderni, integrate con le risorse digitali. Quindi attraverso il nuovo portale Alfabetica si potrà scoprire un altro modo di porre delle domande e altre vie per scoprire il patrimonio, incrociando dati che provengono da domini disciplinari differenti e quindi con la possibilità quindi di creare nuovi percorsi per ampliare le proprie ricerche. Alfabetica presenterà i risultati in maniera ordinata, in box dedicati, rispettando le preferenze espresse e limitando drasticamente il rumore tipico dei motori di ricerca normalmente utilizzati per l'interrogazione simultanea. Il modello concettuale che è alla base del progetto è pensato per il futuro ed è dunque flessibile per sua definizione. Sono infatti previsti collegamenti complementari da realizzarsi attraverso convenzioni e accordi mirati con altri enti e istituzioni culturali che hanno prodotto nel tempo cataloghi e contenuti digitali di alto valore culturale. Uno degli obiettivi più qualificanti per chi come noi dell'ICCU gestiamo un patrimonio immenso, reale o virtuale, sta proprio nel mettere in campo strategie e strumenti mirati per restituire al pubblico dei contenuti strutturati e complessi, in grado di stimolare lo sviluppo del pensiero, la riflessione critica, la crescita delle competenze, la formazione professionale e personale di ciascuno di noi, è una chiave in più per rivolgersi ai giovani e per disegnare il loro futuro. Grazie per l'attenzione e buon lavoro a tutti.
Thank you, Simonetta. Thank you, really. And now, Professor Andrea Zorzi, Director of the Department SAGAS, History, Archaeology, Geography, Fine and Performing Arts. Please, Andrea.
Thank you, Mauro. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored to bring greetings from the Department of History, Archaeology, Geography, Art History and Performing Arts to this international conference on bibliographic control in the digital ecosystem. Our department has been awarded by the Ministry of University and Research as a Department of Excellence for a scientific project focused on cultural heritage. Therefore, a conference that aims to explore the new boundaries of the universal bibliographic control finds in our department a natural place of development. I am pleased to remember that the initiative was promoted by colleagues in the archives, bibliographic, and library science sector. This sector represents, since the establishment of the department, one of its most industrious components in the field of teaching and research. It actively contributed to qualify the University of Florence as one of the reference poles of the science dedicated to the theoretical, historical, and methodological aspects of document and book conservation. I'm therefore very grateful to colleagues who organized this conference, and in particular, Professor Mauro Guerrini, the IFLA Bibliographic section, and the Italian Library Association. I welcome and thank the colleagues here convened from many countries, and I wish you all a constructive conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. And now, before me and then Matilde Koskas for the opening remarks. We are talking of bibliographic control starting with Konrad Gessner's Bibliotheca Universalis, the catalog of printed books in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. In the contemporary era, universal bibliographic control is based on the humanistic ideal of sharing collective knowledge. IFLA has always paid attention to UBC by promoting conferences and publishing texts and documents. From 1990 through the 1st of March 2003, the Deutsche Bibliothek hosted the IFLA Universal Bibliographic Control and International Mark Core activity, demonstrating the direct connection between UBC and the technologies. For years, IFLA has edited IFLA series on bibliographic control, in particular the collection entitled National Bibliography in the Digital Age, Guidance and New Direction, edited by Biasumer in 2009, continues to be fundamental reference text. A statement reaffirms IFLA commitment for UBC was endorsed by a professional committee in December 2012. The IFLA conference of Lyon, France, in 2014 included the seminar entitled Universal Bibliographic Control in the Digital Age, Golden Opportunity or Paradise Lost. In 2001, the Library Congress organized the Conference on Bibliographic Control for the New Millennium, celebrating the 50th anniversary with this theme. In 2008, the Library Congress Working Group on the Future of Bibliographic Control published the important report On the Record. As we can see from this recent event, bibliographic control is central to the history of cataloging and to the history of libraries themselves. The papers from the conference that we are inaugurating today places at the center of the reflection how the concept of UBC has changed in digital ecosystem and how it would presumably change further. This conference, in fact, aims to explore the new boundaries of UBC. Bibliographic control is changing radically because the bibliographic universes and technologies are radically changed, resources, actors, standards, and practices. The point of view of today's bibliographic data models with the semantic web paradigm push the boundaries of exchange behind the homogeneous cataloging system to a transversal dialogue between different approaches, a different cultural and linguistic traditions. The participation of multiple actors is very positive. Understanding how texts are conveyed today in a question culture, awareness, and professional training. This is one of the processes of analyzing the resource. These two aspects, awareness and training, should be common to the training of other figures, publishers, booksellers, mediators of the knowledge process. For centuries, a text was identified by the physical volume. Today, work is at the center, and the content can be presented in many forms. For example, a reader can choose between paper books and e-books based on his or her reading preferences. This content is accompanied by dataset. Metadata has become the protagonist of communication new paradigm. In other words, metadata are today the central paradigm of bibliographic control. The quality metadata of a work contributed to his knowledge enhancement and data creation for bibliographic resources start with the creator of those resources, of course, providing the content, but also usually providing the title of some basic identified data. Then the publishers add their metadata, including some standard identifiers, an important step in the bibliographic control in the digital ecosystem. The process of metadata creation continues through the intellectual contribution of bibliographic agencies and search the retrieval competence of a machine and search as search engines that enhance and increase the value of metadata. Even in cases where publications are made accessible in open access, there is initial investment in the of metadata based on authoritative sources. From the model of UBC based on the centrality and of the national bibliography agencies, we are moving to a dynamic bibliographic control. In the digital world, this is configured as a process of data reuse and enrichment of single data elements. In an evolving ecosystem, the international dimension of virtual space where stockholders meet. In this context, library and in particular, the national libraries no longer have the trust of bibliographic control. This poses an intellectual and operational challenge to library institutions. Library networks still play an important role, in particular through strong collaboration among themselves, through their role and through protagonists of the standards of bibliographic control, and through their role in this field with the other major producer of metadata, such as the memory institutions, including archives and museums. Still, libraries remain an essential part of the digital ecosystem, given their point of view and their history, practice, and theory development over time. What are the consequences of digital transformation for library catalogs and work processes in metadata creation? Or what is the function of relocated catalog on the web? One consequence is that, in addition to libraries and librarians, other institutions, publishers, distributors, private agencies, universities, and professionals, archivists, museum professionals, are contributing to the recording and enrichment of metadata and authority files. Another consequence is that the relationship between libraries and publishers and distributors become more strategic because the publishers are the first after the creator themselves to should create the metadata of a resource, and later the metadata is enhanced by libraries. Libraries feel with particular responsibility the issue of the shared construction of quality data by virtue of the principle of precision, accuracy, and social sharing of the cultural heritage that have described their history. So we can see that bibliographic control today is multicentric and even more cooperative than in the past. Bibliographic agencies maintain and reinforce their role in quality control and authority control, which made use of fundamental tools such as VIR and ISNI that are part of broad international cooperation and authority control projects. It's essential to act on the quality of the source data. The greater the accuracy of the data, the greater the benefits of using those authoritative. Linking identifiers is of strategic importance and places bibliographic and authority data at the center of a solid network of identity information metadata. The choice of form is always cultural founded, but the selection of the preferred form of a name is, in many cases, complex and will depend upon the context in which that name is used. Literary critics may not agree on, for example, the choice of who was the creator of a particular work. Again, even if literary criticism agrees on the entry creating a work, the specific environment in which a system displays the name of a creator may diverge by spelling, languages, script, etc. Yet, for the purposes of retrieval, each variant form is equal to the other. In contemporary software, in fact, each form of name is linked to the other in a cluster. In the past, the bibliographic traditions of the Western world were privileged, but now the global dimension of communication changes all parameters. In the global cultural environment, there has been the important acknowledgement that there is no single form for an author's name that must be used by everyone. The choice of the form of a name to be displayed in a given context is conditioned by the cultural and linguistic context within which the database for that name is placed. Therefore, the cluster of variant forms is fundamental. If a library reference model recall that a nominal entity can have different nomen, all valid, for example, Leonardo da Vinci and Leonardo da Vinci. Today, software helps us because it can present the preferred form in each different cultural and linguistic context. The challenge is defining and sharing the current conceptual models and starting the protocols to launch the collaboration. The tradition of cataloging grows and enriches in dialogue with different communities and groups of users. The free reuse of data can take place in different contexts, from the original ones multiplying for all the opportunities for universal access and for the production of new knowledge. The concept of cultural heritage values is a living idea. Can different cataloging traditions coexist in such a changed context and integrate without losing their formation values? Based on some recent experience, this appears to be possible. Standards must meet these requirements. In practice, this means that they must be flexible and at the same time binding and the great changes in the field of metadata have led to the definition of a new form of bibliographic control. It contemplates interoperability and flexibility in dialogue with various communities. Who knows what the future will bring us again? Perhaps we are still at the beginning of the digital revolution. In the field of metadata and authority control, we could expect developments and surprises from alternative technologies on machine learning or artificial intelligence. I wish you all a useful conference. Thank you. And now, Matilde Koskas is chair of IFA Bibliographic section and head of the book section at the French National Bibliography of the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. Please, Matilde.
Thank you, Mauro. Hello, everyone. Good day. Well, how timely, how welcome this conference is when we haven't had the opportunities we usually do to discuss these topics in 2020, for instance, at IFLA. What luxury to be able to spread out discussions over 5 days and to have such a broad panel of speakers in a dialogue between the Italian and international experience. I really want to thank our Italian colleagues for putting together this conference and intermingling the two perspectives in that way. I think weaving back and forth from the Italian point of view to the international and back will give us a sounding board and a common thread in the dialectics of global and local, which will be conducive to productive discussions. As you see, I come with high expectations of this conference, as I'm sure you do too. I was invited to give these opening remarks as chair of the bibliography section at IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions. So I wanted to start with this simple question: what is universal bibliography control to us? Well, admittedly, UBC is almost 50 years old. Of course, it has evolved. And yes, today, there is no governing entity for it anymore. Still, it is the framework for our activity. I'd almost say it is a state of mind. Implicitly, our activity as National Bibliographic Services contributes to UBC. Even if it was declared obsolete a few years ago, or rather if it changed beyond recognition, I'd say it adapted. It shifted, our understanding of the underlying principles changed, principles like basing it on nations, the question of languages that Mauro touched upon, the object of UBC themselves, not just books anymore, and now the focus on metadata rather than records. Still, I do notice in my discussions with colleagues at home and internationally, it's still the implicit frame of reference for our work. And so, before we start, I'd like to share some questions, reflections, expectations for this conference that I think will resonate with the various papers we're about to hear and discuss. The first that came to my mind was interoperability. It's one of the founding principles of UBC, and an important change from the initial concept of UBC was the recognition of local needs, especially the need to access bibliographic information in one's own language. It modified the original concept, which was more concentrated, not only on the question of language, but in general, the specific information needs and the local cataloging practices. Today, the International Cataloging Code RDA provides for the local, giving many options to cataloging agencies on how to record and display information. But what will this do to the global, to interoperability? Another question is knowledge and access to information and their role in a democracy. Universal bibliographic control is the promise to register, organize, and ultimately give access to everything. UBC and the mass information era may have been said to be incompatible. But mass information and its two painfully obvious pitfalls underscores the need for this compilation and organization of information. Mass information doesn't mean this work, this ideal of UBC is useless because hopeless. It means that properly done, it is needed as much as it ever was, as long as we make it fit the new context. What librarians have to bring to the table is the having thought about this encyclopedic universal idea or ideal for generations, and having a framework and practices in place for more than half a century now. Whether we call it universal bibliographic control or something else, international standards, interoperability, and so on, these underlying principles are still there. We need to be careful not to let them cut us off from the world outside of libraries and keep them more open than they have been in the past. And I'm sure after this week's proceedings, we'll go back to work in our respective institutions with even more ideas on how to adapt to keep this useful framework alive and evolving. There's been an evolution in the concept from the idea of shared bibliographic control to shared entity management. For libraries and librarians, it means thinking about our scope of action, moving from bibliographic and authority records to entities. Which entities do we take responsibility for? What level of quality do we promise our users for each entity? And how do we work with other metadata producers, especially for what we can't take complete responsibility for? Bearing in mind that in this new ecosystem, there might be a new protagonist, the machine, all the developments around artificial intelligence in the broader sense of the term, machine learning and so on. That's something we're just starting to explore, and we don't know yet what it could or couldn't do. At the French National Library, where I work, it feels like very chaotic times. We are working at the same time on the cataloging code, application profiles, format, and the new cataloging application, to say nothing of training, etc. And France is no exception. This is happening all over our institutions right now. It's difficult, but also potentially very fruitful. The progress is parallel in terms of temporality, but in a dialogue, a feedback loop in terms of method, at least ideally. So I'd say it's also very inspiring. It's the kind of chaos that leads to creation. And that's the note I want to end on. I'm rather excited about what's coming, and I hope you are too. And I wish you all a fruitful and thought-provoking conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Matilde. Thank you very much. And now a little break, because we like to screen all the video of our promoters and partners, and then I will introduce Renate Behrens for her paper. Just a few minutes, few seconds, sorry, not minutes, sorry. And Laura is preparing the videos. Please.
La Biblioteca Nazionale di Firenze ha sede in un edificio inaugurato nel 1935, ma la sua origine risale al 1714, quando Antonio Magliabechi donò la sua libreria privata alla cittadinanza. Unita alla Biblioteca Palatina nel 1861, nel 1885 assume la qualifica di Biblioteca Nazionale Centrale. Possiede oltre 6 milioni di volumi, 3 milioni di opuscoli, 430.000 titoli seriali, 25.000 manoscritti e quasi 1 milione di autografi, e inoltre ricca di raccolte di musica stampa e di risorse grafiche. Grazie al deposito legale, esercita il controllo bibliografico sulle pubblicazioni italiane, realizza la bibliografia nazionale italiana, cura gli strumenti impiegati nell'indicizzazione del soggetto, si occupa di risorse digitali e della loro conservazione nel lungo periodo. Con la Biblioteca Nazionale di Roma è uno dei principali poli del Servizio Bibliotecario Nazionale.
The library at the European University Institute in Florence, Italy, enhances the research of an international community of about 1,500 members between PhD researchers, postdoctoral fellows, and professors in the social sciences. To this day, its collections count more than 500,000 books, 500,000 e-books, 365 databases, 107,000 e-journals. The EUI Research Repository, Cadmus, collects, preserves, and provides access to the EUI research outputs, including datasets, according to the EUI Open Access Policy. As an OCLC member, the EUI Library contributes with its cataloguing records to WorldCat to maintain its holdings and to make its collections visible.
The Central Institute for the Union Catalog, based in Rome, coordinates national activities dedicated to cultural heritage through solid technology and a team of professionals powering databases and services to the benefit of the whole library community.
Qui all'ICCU lavoriamo ogni giorno con passione per la valorizzazione del patrimonio, ispirandoci al futuro.
How do you define success? Is it improved educational outcomes? Contributing valuable resources that support student learning and research? How about return on investment? Understanding student and faculty needs and exceeding expectations? Or what about innovation? Providing experiences that enhance learning, but also inspire. At OCLC, our sole focus is helping you on your journey to success. That's it. And WorldShare Management Services is designed to empower your goals. Workflows are up to 4 times faster, creating bandwidth for your team to increase impact where it matters. Actionable analytics support your vision for a culture of academic achievement. And powerful group functionality encourages active collaboration. Your users are always center stage, with an intuitive experience that lets staff, students, and researchers focus on doing amazing things. You define your library's journey to success. WorldShare Management Services helps you get there.
Perfect. Now we are about 10 minutes early, and I would like to introduce Renate Barents. Renate is a librarian in the Office of Library Standards in the German National Library. The title of paper is Standard in a New Bibliographic World, Community Needs versus Internationalization. Please, Renate.
Allora, buona giornata, buon pomeriggio dalla Germania e primo grazie a tutti gli organizzatori della conferenza per l'invito e grazie Mauro per il benvenuto. I will continue in English, which is much more better, I hope, than my Italian. So I like to share my screen and I hope this will work. Can you see something?
Yes, sure.
So can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I will go in full screen presentation. So now it works. As I am a member of the RSC, RDA Steering Committee, and I'm chair from the Committee on Standards in IFLA, you may imagine my topic is standards. And so today I will talk to you about standards, some words, what this means in a new bibliographic world, who are the players in the new bibliographic world, what is the role of standards nowadays in this very different environment, as Mauro Guerini shows us so impressively. What is the role of the communities in this topic? Can international standards be successful? And at the end, I will give you some examples for standards which are very different. As you know, libraries are in transition. They always has been places of knowledge, but in former times, these places of knowledge had been in a very restrictive way. You can imagine even women in former times weren't allowed to access a library, even those of their fathers in their own houses. Fortunately, nowadays, this has changed very, very much. And at the right side of my slide, you can see the new public library in Helsinki in Finland. And libraries has become spaces for life, for living, for learning, and many things more. Some keywords to these libraries in transition. Library, as I said, are living spaces. We are talking about co-working, co-learning, lifelong learning. And I can give you an example for this in Frankfurt, where I'm living and working, where there is one side of the German National Library where I'm working. We have a new project. We will build in some years, we will set up a building together with the universities in the city of Frankfurt. And even in this space, you will not notice the difference and the barriers between the libraries, the researchers, parts and spaces, and so on. So everything has changed and has come together, and libraries get a very much different role than former times. And most of the topics, the important topics for libraries nowadays, is the participation and sharing in cultural assets. When I was a young student, which is very long years ago, our teachers said sometimes to us that librarians are the waiters of science. But this was not right at this times and is not right nowadays. Libraries are mediators of cultural assets and guarantee participation in social development. And this is a difference, a very big difference. And this difference, that librarians are committed to their collections, preparing them for use in respect to the users, this is an important topic for our standards as well. May they be models or standards or whatever you call it. I will not explain here the difference. There are many differences, but They all are standards in different variations. And always you have to keep this in mind, this for your target group and for the whole approach, what you mean, and even if you write or set up a new standard, or if you will actualize a standard. This is not easy at all, as it seems to be in the first glance. Times are changing the more and more faster, and the technical development keeps us running. Our tools are often don't keep ahead with these changes. They are not fast enough, even when we are working in a governmental environment. Librarians, archivists, and museum professionals are often not well enough prepared for this change. We talked about this very much in IFLA context, that training and education for informational professionals had to change and have to fit better for all these things. And even our experts providing and setting up and writing standards have to be prepared much more better for this duty. And the financial pressure may often be an obstacle. Who are the players in this team? It may be a long list, but it cannot be long enough. If libraries will remain places to live and to learn, our tools must be based on a broad, common social understanding. And as always in life, financing must be guaranteed, and enough money has to be made available by the responsible bodies. This is very important. Just some keywords here. Just think about this and keep it in mind. Standards help to put the word of things in order, but they cannot establish the order of things in the world. Let us come to a topic. Who needs standard? What are they for? All communities that want to exchange information or share something. All communities that have common goals and want to advance them. All communities that want to achieve sustainable results and preserve them for the long time. And as you may have noticed, even very free and unorganized communities sooner or later come to the point where they have to make arrangements. These do not always have to be extensive regulations. I give you an example. For example, the 10 Commandments of the Bible are an ethical standard that has been valid for thousands of years and has never widespread without ever being changed or adapted. But modern standards, and not standards from the Bible or other religious contexts, they have to be actualized and adapted to the world and to the change in the world. What does this mean in practice? Standards are mostly a community task. Standards should be interoperable with further communities and cultural circumstances like languages and scripts. Standards should be clear and understandable. And as I mentioned before, standards should always be up to date. These approach places far-reaching demands on the communities. The timelines alone is often not possible under the given conditions. Cooperations with other players is not so easy to guarantee and is costly. And very often, some things hint us we still think in the world of sections, such as libraries, museums, archives, etc. And an interdisciplinary cooperation is needed, but this is not easy to achieve. Who are the communities? Communities can be very diverse. These may be language or language-based communities, maybe institutional based communities like national libraries or research libraries. They may be resource-based, like for music resources, a community for music resources, or even only interest groups can build up a community. And there are, at the end of this list, there may be the big and huge international bodies who have a global approach and which are global communities. What should communities do? The target group must be very clear. And there must be an organizational concept. There must be some responsible persons or institutions for the implementation. There must be sufficient human and financial resources. And there must be sufficient communication about the project. There must be, at the end of this list, a network in which the standard can be embedded. Let's come to, we are talking very much about exchange, inter-community exchange, international exchange, international communities. Is this reality or is this a myth? Our world is too heterogeneous for one fits for all solutions. That is clear. The cultural conditions and traditions are too different. In addition, there are real barriers such as language or script. Local or specialized communities need rules in their language that are also understood by their users. Today, more than ever, cataloging is subject to economic pressure and must process resources in previously unimaginable quantities. We never had such quantities in times before, when you think about internet resources and so on. Without machine support, this cannot longer be achieved, but machines also need clear and comprehensible instructions. So internationalization can only be created in a process of convergence. Compromises are indispensable, and there must also be a certain openness and willingness on the part of the user communities. Insisting on popular traditions can be harmful here. What is the future of international standards? International standards need basic models as well as framework guidelines. But on the other side, application profiles for the user communities are essential and should be interoperable with the standard itself. That's what Matilde Costas before mentioned, that all library communities, archives, and museums communities has to work on these application profiles, on the adaptation of models and frameworks. And last but not least, the technical formats that are flexible enough to reflect this and be complemented by community information. They are the basis for the implementation. Without these technical support, international standards cannot be used as they are thought about. At the end of my presentation, I will give you 3 examples which are very much different. The first of all is called RNAB. It's from German-speaking countries. The name means cataloging resources with authority data in archives and libraries. And the area of application of this small standard are resources in literary archives. It's a very, very slim standard, about 35 pages. It's freely accessible, can also be used by non-trained staff, and it works very well in the last years. It had been actualized in 2018. It's now adapted to RDA as far as it has been possible. And an adaptation to the new RDA toolkit is planned for the next years. RDA is well known for all of you. I don't have to explain it. We have, here as well, we have an actionalization. The new RDA toolkit is online since mid-December. And as mentioned before, these means as RDA has developed into a model or a framework, the adaptation work in the communities is very much important, and we are now on the way to, in Europe, in North America, and worldwide, to have these adaptations to the community needs. The last example are the ISPD, the International Standard for Bibliographic Description. Well, it is it's set up and made for worldwide use. It's freely accessible. It's an IFLA standard and is also applicable for smaller communities. It has actually the consolidated edition and a fundamental revision of the standard and adaptation to new requirements in cataloging is underway in an IFLA working group, initially at the manifestation level. So, standards help to put the world on things in order, but with various standards connected as far as possible, exchangeable with modern technical support, and this is very important, and adaptable to the needs of different user communities, there may be more order in the world of cultural heritage. That's my conclusion, and grazie per l'attenzione.
Thank you, Renate. Thank you very much. The internationalization is really, really important, and in the global world, we have the standard for everyone, and is very important. No question for you, and I can introduce Tiziana Possemato. Tiziana is a PhD student at the University of Florence and the Chief Information Officer of Casalini Libri and found managing partner of AtCult. Please, Tiziana.
Thank you, Mauro.
Sorry, the title of a paper is Universal Bibliographic Control in the Semantic Web, Opportunities and Challenges for the Reconciliation of Bibliographic Data Models. Please, Tiziana.
Thank you, Mauro. And hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to share with you some thoughts about the opportunities and the challenges of bibliographic control in the semantic web. A brief background. The 1970s IFLA Universal Bibliographic Control and International Mark Office can be considered the starting point for a larger discussion about universal bibliographic control. It defends some core items, such as the importance of international sharing of bibliographic data to help reduce costs and to encourage greater cooperation worldwide. The aim was that each national bibliographic agency would catalog the works published in its own country and establish the names of its authors, and that the data would be shared and reused around the world. 1974, Dorothy Anderson's work, in which some items are clearly underlined. The responsibility of national bibliographic agencies for creating an authoritative bibliographic record of publications from their own countries, and the need to follow international standards in the creation of both bibliographic and authority records. Another important element was added in 1990. The centrality of the user's needs brings out the importance of having understandable data locally, even in a world of shared data. This aspiration is welcomed and accompanied by new web technologies, which, however, open the frontiers to another binomial, the relationship between a local and global dimension and their balance. In 2008, the On the Record report published by the Library of Congress Working Group on the Future of Bibliographic Control officially declares the need to adopt, in the definition of standards and rules, new web technologies and related languages in order to evolve from a rigid monolithic language and limitation to the domain, MARC in all its declinations, to something open and comprehensible to a global level. In December 2012, IFLA reaffirms the different but closely related positions and roles of IFLA and the national bibliographic agencies in the context of universal bibliographic control. And to summarize, the role of the National Bibliographic Agency is to express the cultural richness of a country in a way that can be universally shared with other countries and agencies. The focus is on local production in a global context, as well as the role of IFLA in coordinating national bibliographic agencies, provide the standards and guidelines to make data universally shareable in a wider community. So that's once again the same concept of local production in a global context. So the Patrick Geddes statement seems to definitely express this duality between local expression and global aspiration, between local vision and global perspective, which does not only concern the content of what is conveyed by the national bibliographic agencies, but also the form and therefore the way of expressing them. As Gordon Dansier and Myrna Wheeler affirm, local content is held in global careers and global content is held in local careers. This balance of local and global vision worked well until the content being broadcast was defined by national bibliographic agencies and controlled through descriptions, built in compliance with shared rules and standards, all expressed through bibliographic and authority records. The record keeps the scene as an absolute protagonist and conveys this dual trend quite effectively. But a good story doesn't necessarily last forever. The MARC record, after almost 16 years of widespread use within the library community, has begun to show its limits in comparison with the language of the web, lighter, partially more understandable, and transversal. So in the context of cataloging approaches, the record becomes again a protagonist of a new revolution. From the record as a whole with meaning in its entirety to entity as a real thing in the world, the real world object. Each record has metadata that are useful to derive properties in order to build entities, but they are hidden and usually expressed in a way that only partially represent the entity, which could be expressed in various ways and forms. The language of the web runs in support of traditional standards in order to simplify the information and make it understandable. The goal is to have a method so simple that it can express anything, and at the same time so structured that it can be used and reused by computer applications. But the description of things means to give a representation of reality. The new languages of the web express the attempt to bring down the veil of Maya, the one that obscures the sight of humans and does not allow them to reach reality. This transition can be seen as a shifting from identity as a form of presentation of an entity to a real entity consisting of a series of properties and relationships useful for its identification. Behind the topos are the winner of Austerlitz and the loser of Waterloo the same person? There is the meaning of this philosophical but also practical passage. Behind the many possible expressions of an entity, of an identity, there is a unique and in some ways unrepeatable entity. However faithful or authoritative the description is, it always remains a representation of reality, which is other than reality itself. But the change of view helps the observer to get closer to that reality and to interpret it in a different way, hopefully more respectful of the object represented. This is easily and visually expressed as the passage from a flat, static, two-dimensional worldview to a dynamic, three-dimensional worldview. The record, often expressed through a globally shared syntax, but within specific communities and specific domains, manifests all the limits of a monolithic and flat object. The work told through the traditional bibliographic or authority record is as if it is assumed the same two-dimensional and static features of its representation. The transition to the real world object refers to another way of understanding the object in its three-dimensionality and concreteness. Those who produce metadata are still obliged to remain on each side of the veil of Maya that we were talking about, but they come close to a three-dimensional object which can be observed from a variety of points of view. A view that best allows you to tell the thing in its being a thing. The view of the producer of the metadata becomes the same view of whoever, in the example of Van Gogh's room, tries to look at it as the original creator must have seen and imagined it, thus approaching what his idea should have been originally, although still being able to give only one or more representation. And the same is true for each kind of entity. Here, example of authority records from Vincent van Gogh and its three-dimensional view. Entity is built by putting together properties expressed through different ontologies and vocabularies from different institutions. And the same entity, the real-world object, can continue to be expressed through one or multiple identities. What is striking in this new perspective is the change in the cataloging geography. New sources, not necessarily institutional, can contribute to represent the same entity in a network that goes beyond the local or national borders, creating a digital ecosystem that is not at all contained within cultural, linguistic, geographical, or thematic limits. We are living concretely on a cloud of data. Many domains meet on the web to enrich and extend the informative power of data. Libraries are in a certain way forced to reorganize themselves in a similar way, proposing a wider network where each node can be constituted by a library, an archive, a museum, and information provider. In this context, it's necessary to dialogue with the heterogeneous communities, more or less authoritative, driven by the web, and often created by institutions or group of users quite different from the ones to which cataloging tradition is accustomed. The free reuse of data can also take place in very different contexts from those of the origin of that data, multiplying for everyone the opportunities for universal access and the production of new knowledge. In the future, an impressive representation of some standards for digital collection. It expressed the richness of our cultural domain. We can only imagine how much it expands by meeting the standards and the languages of other communities. So the main questions that arise are, does the universal bibliographic control still make sense? And do the national agencies that take charge of it still have a role in this heterogeneous context? Each ontology or dataset refers to an institution or to a community whose strength and authority is guaranteed by the strength and authority of the community that creates and manages the source. These aspects are also assured by the number and by the typology of the community guarantor of the source. These precepts should partially stem the risks inherent to the AAA principle, which is the founding base of the semantic web. Anyone can say anything about anything. In this example, the entity Elio Morpurgo, an Italian politician of Jewish origin and victim of the Holocaust, is rebuilt through highly authoritative sources. The SIDEC Ontology, l'ontologia della Fondazione Centro di Documentazione Ebraica Contemporanea, OCD Ontology of the Italian Camera dei Deputati, and the Ontology of the Italian Senato della Repubblica. In such a complex data production chain, where data are built and distributed by heterogeneous sources, ranging from authors to publishers, from blogs to libraries, from social networks to ontologies, the role of national bibliographic agencies cannot fail to become central as a guarantor of the authority, persistence, and updating of information. In this transition phase, where it seems that the strongest approach is the AAA principle, a founding criterion has to be defined to harmonize the different voices speaking about a thing. Democracy seems the most eligible to balancing and coordinating a square where anyone can say anything about anything. But as in all democratic systems, it's necessary to choose someone who represents the people. Thus, also in entity representation, different institutions can choose between different variant forms, that the one that best represents the entity in its own community to better meet and satisfy the needs of its users, be it geographical, cultural, domain expert, and so on. An enormous number of trips are created in the semantic web, regardless of their quality and truth. The certification of who says something is expressed through the fourth element, that is the provenance. Its role in a shared environment is fundamental. It ensures that each institution as a source assumes responsibility for the data trust. It allows institutions to share their data in wider context, keeping track of their contribution, data traceability, and it allows user, professional and end user, as well as machines to apply filters to select data from specific sources through application profile. An example of a trip with the addition of the fourth element, the provenance, from the Library of Congress, that is responsible for the creation of the trip. The assertion is not more the preferred label is Pirandello Luigi with date, but the Library of Congress says that the preferred label is Pirandello Luigi with date. Anyone can say anything about anything, assuming the responsibility of the assertion. So to conclude, the attention of the entire data production chain, from the publisher to the cataloging and distribution agencies, returns to focus on the real and essential information power of the data, structured so as to be universally understood and shared. In this new ecosystem, in this new geography with completely open borders, in which the actor and information elements are themselves open and heterogeneous, the constraints and the rigidities expressed in the past by formats, standards, rules on national cataloging, often closely linked to specific domain, completely lose their meaning. Authoritative institutions, both local and global, reaffirm their role and their centrality, providing they are able to adapt themselves and their services to the runaway evolution of the times. Thanks. Grazie a tutti.
Thank you, Tiziana. And there are some questions for Renate and Tiziana. Renate, if you if you prefer to reply immediately, I send you the question by email, but you can read the question in D and R.
Yes, I saw it in the question and answers section. I think it's going, it's about internationalization and linked data, I think.
Yeah.
It's from an anonymous people, whoever it is. Sure, linked data applications are international per se, but I have to commit that most of our systems and formats are not able to build up all these things that we are providing in standards. For example, RDA, let me say it, is purely set up to be in a linked data application and environment, but most of our systems and formats are not able to show this and to adapt this. But we hope that in future it will be much more better. Linked data is international per se because it's not language based or something like this. But I think we have to be a bit patient if many of institutions can provide this. So it may be a solution, but only for huge applications, not for small applications.
Thank you, Renate. And another question to Tiziana. Can you reply, Tiziana, please?
Sorry, Mauro, can you repeat the question, please?
The question was...
is on the question and answer. Is there an international platform for this vision of linked data where everybody can say anything about anything? I sound me a bit like a VF 2.0. Oh, this is an interesting question. In this moment, this assertion that anybody can say anything about anything is the base assumption of open linked data, where nobody can investigate about the truth of a trip, but only about the correct form of a trip. But I think that we are in the way to create this kind of platform where we can have entities built by various assumptions. I'm not here to speak about the project where I are involved as my regular work, so is not this the time to speak about this, but I'm following different projects where we are trying and we see that the scope is to put together assertion, not the whole data set, but specific trip. So it means a specific assertion coming from a source. But importance in this sense is to declare the provenance, because only declaring the provenance in your data, you can assure the quality of your data. So usually in our project, we try to link our data when we build the entity, applying and using different sources that can go to from Wikidata to VF to institutional sources, but important to give a authoritative level, so a high quality level to each assertion is declaring the provenance, so that really anyone can say anything about anything, but assuming its responsibility. So I can give you some name of projects, but I prefer to not name any project, but assuring that this is the way that we are following.
Thank you, Tiziana. There is another question to Renate. Please, Renate.
Yes, sorry, I just saw it. Please excuse me. It's about training. And yes, I think you're right that most training institutions, universities and library schools, they are going towards more information and not library or archive or museum, these sections, these traditional sections that we are knowing. But we have to keep the balance. I saw in the last year, sometimes when young colleagues are joining us in the library, they are only trained on technical aspects, and we have to keep the balance between, because cataloging is essential for authority data, for bibliographic control and its whole. And universities and library schools have to provide these in a balance, both, not only the technical aspects, but the others, providing data, working up data, providing authority data. This knowledge has to be provided. But you're completely right that the section thinking, that's not up to date nowadays. We have to think more in communities, in wider communities, because even very small, if you start, every library have images, so you are in objects, you have objects, and you have to do something with this. So there is a big need for informational professionals to keep this in mind, and for the universities to change some of their trainings and to keep this balance between practical cataloging and technical aspects.
Thank you, Renate. Any other question? And now we are very early with the program, but I would like to ask to Ian Binglow and Abigail Sparling to present their papers, if possible. Ian is head of cataloging strategies at the University of Alberta Library, and Abigail is the serial metadata librarian at the same university. The title of their paper is Control or Chaos, Embracing Change and Harnessing Innovation in an Ecosystem of Shared Bibliographic Data. Please.
Okay. Hope everyone can hear me okay. Right. Well, hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this presentation, Control or Chaos, Embracing Change and Fostering Innovation for Bibliographic Data. As this session and the forthcoming paper focus on harnessing innovation, but also discussing challenges and opportunities for bibliographic control. We first want to pause to thank so many people working on myriad projects. Across the areas covered today, truly inspiring work is happening, and where we point to challenges is not meant to be critical, but to identify areas where we can all come together to address them. So first, though, what will we cover today? So in an effort to capture some of the challenges for bibliographic control emerging in the changing landscape for library bibliographic metadata, we'll focus on several key areas: RDA and BibFrame, what surprises we find in our MARC, what should BibFrame and BibFrame infrastructure look like, and then have a bit of a discussion on harnessing innovation and maintaining control. So we choose these topics because on the one hand, with MARC, we have the legacy of library bibliographic metadata, which must be converted for reuse. On the other hand, we have RDA and BibFrame, which, while not new projects, are only now emerging as standards for linked data exchange. Before diving in with RDA and BibFrame, though, let's start with some context for how we approach this examination. So in 2018, strategic planning at the University of Alberta Library resulted in a plan for moving forward with linked data. Much of this session is informed by experiences and observations from projects since then, and other various points of reference, for instance, being members of the Program for Cooperative Cataloging. As such, it's worth noting that from the outset, that this presentation will focus on bibliographic control in a BibFrame context. This is in line with decisions at UAL for transitioning our MARC data to a linked data ecosystem, but also in line with our commitment to PCC. We fully recognize, however, that the PCC does not represent all libraries, and that BibFrame is just a piece of a larger linked data framework. While much of what we will discuss may have applications for interchange of linked data for libraries as a whole, we purposely scoped the discussion to BibFrame here, as there's plenty to talk about. BibFrame implementation is a large-scale, ongoing process for us. And with these new tools and developments comes the need to revise our workflows and technical ecosystems to support a hybrid MARC and BibFrame environment. As we've undergone this work, the importance of replacing workflows for metadata reuse has become top of mind. When work on BibFrame was limited to the initial Library of Congress test, developing workflows for sharing BibFrame data, no doubt presented certain challenges. Testing metadata reuse requires both supporting systems and data to share. Now, however, along with LC, there are other national libraries working on BibFrame implementation and numerous other libraries working through projects like LD4P and ShareBDE, such that there are literally billions of quads of data live in BibFrame. We need to make sure that BibFrame data can support interchange. To achieve this, there needs to be agreement on what standard BibFrame looks like. Interchange with MARC certainly is not perfect. Different communities of practice apply different standards and different MARC formats. Quality varies, and the copying of records to local silos duplicates effort. At the same time, systems for working with MARC and data flow or workflows are so long established and practitioners so practiced with it that we often take interchange for granted. Beyond the challenges of working with new standards in a linked data environment, the scale of change away from MARC necessitates fairly long-term hybrid environments with compounding complexity. Figure 1, or what's shown in this slide, is provided as an example, capturing the plans for UAL for linked data implementation, looking at a 3-year goal mark. While some library systems are beginning to adapt to BibFrame, the complexity highlighted in this diagram is obvious, making this kind of transition involve significant adaptation and/or system migration. As a result, not all libraries will be moving from MARC to BibFrame at once, necessitating support for hybrid systems for some time. That the library community is now at a point where we have working tools to pull things together like this is an incredible achievement. On the other hand, though, to bridge from individual toolings to a functional ecosystem means that they all need to work together. And given the reliance on shared data in libraries, they don't just need to work together for an individual institution, but internationally. The thing is that as we shift away from MARC for the purpose of interchange, what we are left with are two relatively new standards, RDA and BibFrame, providing new content and encoding standard respectively, but whose combination is indeed emergent. For the remainder of this session, we will focus on RDA, BibFrame, and related aspects pertinent to bibliographic control for examining our experiences with LD4P2 and ShareBDE. We'll begin by wading through the chaotic divide between RDA and BibFrame. To do this, we need to take a trip into the past and the initial release of both. So diving approximately a decade into the past leads to a few key points. From the very outset of RDA in 2010, there was agreement that an alternative to MARC was required to support the extent of RDA. MARC has, of course, continued to do its best to evolve since then, but really we've had approximately 10 years where theory for cataloging content standards have been untested by practice. BibFrame has also had a long development trajectory, with initial work starting in 2011, with the goal of creating a community standard to allow RDA to move beyond MARC. We would argue, however, that really this work didn't accelerate with a wider library community until 2017, when LC released conversion tools and specifications for testing. Along the same approximate timeline, early implementation cases for BibFrame emerged, and large-scale projects like LD4P2 and ShareBDE meant that data and tools in production allowed for development of best practices and testing of theory dating back to when Ferber was initially released in 1998. Reflecting on this timeline, 2017 to 2020 has seen increased development, not just in BibFrame, but in the evaluation, testing, and analysis of the use of RDA in a linked data environment. This acceleration has resulted in beautiful chaos, with further work on data modeling, more maturity in conversion processes, and use case development driving novel extensions and adaptations for the use of RDA in a BibFrame context. With the RDA 3R project and the new toolkit, changes are significant enough that the PCC chose to postpone implementation until at least July 2022. In part, this was based on the need for further work on policy statements and metadata documentation, but there is also a recognition that a test is warranted for both application in MARC and BibFrame. In 2010, a test was carried out for the initial version of RDA, but at the time it was focused on application in MARC only. So with the development of BibFrame, we're really just getting to a point where many components can come together. with the implementation cases such as National Library of Sweden, projects like ShareVDE and LD4P. Tests with actual data and systems can finally happen for both BibFrame and the use of RDA as a cataloging content standard with it. So working on the creation of application profiles for Sinopia as part of LD4P2, with the Sinopia cataloging editor, we've had the opportunity to test the application of RDA in BibFrame. For this analysis in Sinopia, it's worth providing the context that members of LD4P2, including UAL, were all PCC institutions. While application profiles from the Library of Congress were used as a starting point, Sinopia development then allowed for the creation of base application profiles for all users and experimentation and localization, such that each member could create profiles of their own. This flexibility continues to be a strength, allowing for ongoing development of core and base profiles, while allowing for testing of new concepts. Through the course of work on Sinopia application profiles for UAL, decisions on use of properties needed to be made. In constructing these, thought was given to PCC standards and ensuring that core elements were captured for resource description, for monographs and continuing resources. The example shown in this slide is an extract of the JSON file from UAL's monographs profile in Sinopia, adjusted into a spreadsheet. Along with the property list and labels, there's also a column highlighting RDA instruction and entry notes. Given the importance of RDA for PCC, past work was leveraged for the creation of UAL continuing resources and monograph profiles. In particular, the mappings from CSR and BSR to BibFrame provided a quick reference to ensure that Sinopia application profiles captured key elements of description. This initial launch point was then informed by iterative phases of development and feedback with catalogers at UAL and collaboration with others at LD4P2 to continually improve our application profiles, as well as those for the base ones. The results are still a work in progress, but we have a functional application profile that demonstrates an implementation scenario for RDA and linked data with BibFrame, complete with links pointing to the appropriate sections of the RDA toolkit for guidance and cataloging practice. One key difference between RDA and BibFrame that surfaces in much of the literature, though, is the difference between core classes. In BibFrame, the use of BibFrame has expression, and BibFrame expression of helps solve this in the creation of relationships. But ultimately, they end up as work-to-work relationships, and this has been a matter of some considerable discussion. Happily, work in the ShareVDE community has attempted to address this discrepancy with an extension to BibFrame. The ShareVDE opus was developed in relation to the ShareVDE work based on iterative analysis of library collections converted from ARC to BibFrame, and utilizing LRM and RDA elements as a guide.
Jan, please, can you please speak slowly, please, a little slowly? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sure. The model that surfaced, shown here on this slide, with the ShareVDE opus as a type of BibFrame work, performs something of an ontological magic trick, preserving core elements and definitions for BibFrame for those that choose not to use the extension, but allowing for the benefits of the opus in terms of aggregation of like works or equivalent of the RDA expression and use with RDA as applicable. It's worth emphasizing that the ShareVDE opus emerged as a result of large-scale testing of real-world data and was based on the identified need for pulling together like works. This is a beautiful example of theory being proven by practice, but at the same time highlighting the nature of the collaborative work of the real-world application of RDA and BibFrame in the ShareVDE community. While this is an exciting development, how extensions like this and others like the BibFrame Hub inform the development of BibFrame as a standard remains to be determined. And still, however, RDA conformance questions remain. As captured by the task group on PCC Sinopia Applications Profiles final report, it is well known that there are no official mappings between BibFrame and RDA. The closest we have are the LC profiles and the BSR and CSR to BibFrame spreadsheets from some years ago, but none of these is official. The creation of such official mappings, one would think, should be a high priority for the RDA steering committee to support RDA implementation scenarios. Yet for the time being, their absence does not mean that the data does not work. An important piece of this discussion about what official RDA is stems from differing opinions on what RDA needs to be for particular communities of practice. The PCC position statement on RDA from August 2019 indicated that for PCC, RDA is to be considered a loose content standard. This distinction is tied to further developments of RDA, think about the RDA 3R project, where increasingly efforts have appeared to focus on shifting RDA from a content to an encoding standard with RDA RDF. Further stressing the difference in definition, in May 2020, the RSC released a discussion paper on RDA conformance, indicating the required use of RDA RDF and RDA constrained elements. Given that PCC is not using RDA RDF in this way, it suggests that PCC data in MARC or BibFrame cannot be considered RDA conformant and thus not an implementation scenario. Similarly, despite early concerns about the use of RDA constrained elements in a linked data environment, the 2020 discussion paper indicated that the unconstrained element set is not an integral part to RDA, and its use in metadata statements is not conformant with RDA. This, we think, is an unfortunate policy approach and strongly points to the need for further community collaboration and standards development. Nevertheless, as mappings are established between constrained and unconstrained elements in RDA, ultimately what is important here is semantic interoperability. If in order to implement RDA in BibFrame, PCC needs to cease being conformant with RDA, so long as it works for interchange, the focus here should be on further collaborative efforts toward that end. So reflecting back on slide 4 or figure 1, this distinction between the use of BibFrame versus RDA RDF for encoding is an important one. If we end up with a large number of libraries using both, then we will want to ensure interoperability and reuse of data between them. While RDA is certainly comparable to BibFrame, there are notable differences, for example, with some elements having one-to-many or many-to-one relationships. Nevertheless, as demonstrated by work on Snopia application profiles, core element sets can clearly be mapped and utilized from one to the other. And this should also support mappings for interchange or indeed for the use of both in a shared data set. Moving along, so while determining interactions between the emergent library linked data standards are important for moving forward, we must also consider that libraries, as they move to BibFrame, the majority of BibFrame descriptions will have started as MARC records. As such, some consistency is needed for the choices we make on how to convert them to BibFrame. Here we must consider changes or variations of cataloging standards and practices across time and place, where our data reflects both ongoing changes in practice as standards have evolved, and where communities of practice have taken different approaches to resource description in MARC. As such, conversion processes from MARC to BibFrame face the challenge of accounting for myriad variations. Whether looking at the needs of an individual library, consortia, or library system, the changes in standards and local practices over time need to be addressed when converting to BibFrame. The work done by Shared VDE on MARC to BibFrame conversion is a prime example of this. Given membership from national and research libraries across North America and Europe, multiple languages and variations resulting from unique communities of practice, they all needed to be analyzed and accounted for through the conversion processes. One initial approach to work through this was to analyze the results of conversion process by looking at converted records that were created in 1985 and 2015 separately, looking at pre versus post RDA records, for instance. This, along with a more comprehensive analysis by Share VDE member institutions and the Transformation Council, this assessment informed adjustments to the Share VDE MARC to BibFrame conversion. While a comprehensive analysis of this is outside the scope of this presentation, it's important perhaps to note that handling some of these differences requires decisions, specific solutions, and sometimes compromises. That many such variances need to be considered and decisions made for conversion, matching, and clustering again points to a desperate need for standardization, at least for core elements. If these decisions are made independently for a given library or community, for elements that are not solely local extensions or elements, then we're setting ourselves up for trouble as we begin sharing data. Further, this speaks to the importance of transition planning. While MARC will need to be supported for some time to come, updates to it should be made with an awareness of the impact on multiple conversion processes. Thank you. I'll pass you over to Abigail.
Thanks, Ian. So as Ian mentioned, consistency through conversion to BibFrame is key for interoperability. And in a similar vein, we also have to coordinate consistency between different flavors of BibFrame. While the BibFrame ontology was created to allow for flexibility, it's the same flexibility that has resulted in these distinct flavors of BibFrame modeling. And these impact interoperability between different BibFrame implementers and the ability for external communities to create data mappings to and from BibFrame. If we want to be able to create workable BibFrame data and the supporting infrastructure, in particular one that works for libraries as they transition, then we need the following. First, we need the data output of each MARC to BibFrame conversion to be interoperable with natively created BibFrame data. We need to be able to reuse the BibFrame data created in one community in other BibFrame stores, so making sure various flavors of BibFrame are interoperable. We need BibFrame descriptions to be converted to MARC with similar consistency and for use cases for this MARC data to be defined. And finally, we need new tools and processes to support different BibFrame serializations or for the community to decide on which to use for development. Next slide. An example highlighting the need for the first 2 points is embodied in the current Sinopia copy cataloging workflows. In Sinopia, catalogers can search other sources for data to reuse. So here we have a screenshot of a search for UAL's ShareVDE work description for the title Meditations. Next slide. Reuse of BibFrame data in this way is a critical requirement for implementation. However, because the differences in shape of the BibFrame data created using Sinopia application profiles and the BibFrame data created by ShareVDE through their conversion and clustering processes, challenges arise when attempting to import ShareVDE descriptions into Sinopia application profiles. So here, this slide illustrates how a number of triples from the ShareVDE description were unable to be brought into the PCC monographic work Sinopia application profile when trying to reuse that data there. Similarly, data created using different application profiles in Sinopia created by different members of the community can also result in unused triples when you try to bring data from one into another. In this case, work is underway to resolve inconsistencies through collaborative effort with LD for P3, ShareVDE, and PCC. But as more implementation cases emerge for BibFrame, it makes sense to save work down the line by ensuring standardization to enable data reuse now. Next slide. So speaking to the second 2 needs, the case of conversion from BibFrame to MARC can be examined. After significant work and soliciting feedback from LD for P institutions, LC released the XSLT and conversion specs for BibFrame to MARC in May 2020 in order to support this hybrid MARC BibFrame ecosystem. As encouraging as this development is, in discussions on bibliographic control, we'd like to highlight 2 challenges. So the first is that conversion output from BibFrame to MARC is again dependent on the modeling choices and the resulting shape of the BibFrame data that you start with. This meant that when attempting to convert Sinopia BibFrame data with the LC converter, errors occur based on these differences in Sinopia versus LC application profile decisions. We will point out that similar inconsistencies in the shape of BibFrame and the impact on data interoperability are highlighted in the recently published final report of the PCC task group on Sinopia application profiles. So if you want more information on that, you can find it there. The other issue is that the LC converter only works with RDF XML, while Sinopia utilizes JSON-LD and ShareVDE uses NQuads. These modeling differences and serialization differences could well encourage the development of further conversion processes, each of which will then require further independent decisions by communities, compounding the complexity of the situation that we are in. Next slide. So where does this leave us? Since the early days, LC has acknowledged that the BibFrame model, quote, like MARC, should be able to accommodate any number of content models and specific implementations, but still enable data exchange between libraries. It needs to support new metadata rules and content standards, in particular RDA, and therefore BibFrame must broaden and narrow the format universe for exchange of bibliographic data. And that quote's from 2012. Next slide. As we know, community effort and experimentation utilizing BibFrame has demonstrated its ability to broaden our universe. Experimentation has led to the creation of unique community extensions, format-specific application profiles, and mappings between other emergent and project-specific library-linked data models. It has allowed us to work together as a library community, supported by project partners, to begin building the systems and infrastructure we need to start converting, creating, editing, and making BibFrame data discoverable to our users. However, to support a working BibFrame data ecosystem, the need to narrow our focus and define our core standards to support BibFrame interchange and conversion is now necessary to maintain control across implementations. Moreover, the process of BibFrame implementation without exception requires a period where hybrid systems are in place, utilizing both BibFrame and MARC. This complex ecosystem requires standard practice more than we've ever needed it. Next slide. Experimentation and iterative development is a common characteristic of ontology building in LAM institutions, and BibFrame is no exception here. In fact, as noted, the BibFrame model's flexibility and implementation, while allowing for exploration and extensions across multiple communities, has led us to this impasse if we want to move ahead with wider implementation. With this knowledge, how do we move forward and define a standard BibFrame that supports creation, reuse, and conversion workflows? So to do so, we argue the following conditions need to be met. So the first is to define core BibFrame elements necessary for resource description. This is essential to facilitating the creation, reuse, and conversion of BibFrame data between libraries. It's noteworthy then that while putting together this presentation, the PCC-specific Sinopia application profiles were released with this intention. This is an excellent start towards standardization for the PCC community, and hopefully it will extend to other communities and institutions as well. While these application profiles will certainly support the identification of core BibFrame elements with attention to RDA implementation within them, they provide and also to provide a template through which to test the resulting data, they're not going to resolve the inconsistencies between the shape of BibFrame data being created and shared by other sources, such as LC and ShareBDE, as we've mentioned in this presentation. So that leads us to the need to define a standard BibFrame model and shape to support this conversion and data reuse that we require. We know that challenges in assessing LAM data models often arise because of difficulties implementing the model in a technical production environment in order to assess its successes. To date, the complexity of building systems to support the use and analysis of BibFrame data, we would argue, has been a barrier to effective evaluation of the ideal shape of BibFrame data to support LRM user tasks. However, with the stores and discovery systems currently under development by ShareBDE and LD4P, we will soon be in a position, or starting to be in a position, to use BibFrame's flexibility to our advantage, to be able to iterate and test standard BibFrame core application profiles to verify their utility for catalogers and users alike. Once a BibFrame core and model are defined, catalogers and tool developers will be able to create with confidence, knowing that their work will have a wide application. So the next thing that we need is to define MARC use cases in a BibFrame environment. An interesting nuance of the discussion around BibFrame standardization is the need to determine use cases and standards to cover what we expect from MARC that's been converted from BibFrame. One approach, as represented by the LC converter currently, is to continue supporting MARC interchange for use and discovery. Another could be to utilize the BibFrame descriptions for discovery purposes, but utilize a much simpler, slim MARC output for inventory control in existing MARC systems. The later approach could simplify conversion processes for libraries moving to BibFrame, but would have obvious implications for metadata reuse. Further investigation into these points is timely, as LD4P3 is currently developing separate BibFrame to MARC processes to support the conversion of native Sinopia BibFrame data. And so finally, we also need to define implementation scenarios for the use of RDA 3R and BibFrame. So along with defining BibFrame standards, we also need to determine how the larger cataloging community will be implementing RDA 3R and BibFrame to ensure data interoperability and reuse. Next slide. So the next things that we require are wider community initiatives and best practices to continue successfully to bring BibFrame implementations together with a focus on bibliographic control. And so some of these things have already started, and we want to definitely acknowledge that. And that points to this first point, which is developing or continue developing a community of practice to ensure open feedback loops between LC, large-scale projects and BibFrame implementers, but also the wider library linked data community on whom we can draw for their knowledge and expertise. We would also like to see transparency prioritized around ongoing and future developments to the BibFrame ontology and technological infrastructure that supports it. So in this, we mean publishing supporting analyses and user testing data that support updates to the ontology and decisions around modeling. And finally, we need to develop and coordinate implementation timelines for both RDA and BibFrame. This does not mean to reflect when everyone moves to linked data, but when both standards are supported for application and exchange. When these kinds of timelines are in place, libraries are going to be able to make more informed decisions about local practice and investment in transition. So all of these steps to maintaining bibliographic control in a BibFrame environment point to the need for community-wide planning, standardization, and transparent communications. As always, innovation will still be key to this work to ensure that we move forward in a way that serves libraries and library users while making use of the technological advances that linked data affords us. Supporting the basic needs of interoperability through the refinement of a standardized BibFrame core will provide the library community with a solid foundation on which to build and facilitate the process of harnessing innovation for wider application into the future. And with that, we will thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you to Jan and Abigail. And there are two questions for you, and you can read the question, and if you think you can reply to the Jess and the Eloise. The first question is about the relation between RDA and BibFrame. The second one is about RDA 3R for MARC 21BF community.
Sorry, I'm not seeing.
Can you see?
Questions, are they in the?
They're in the answered section. So Ian, I'll read the first question. With this gap between RDA and BibFrame, highlighted recently by some of the University of Washington's work on RDA and Sinopia, what do you think is the way forward to bring the RDA focus and standard to the fore in LC's BibFrame efforts as a way to encourage a movement toward RDA and RDF, as opposed to strictly BibFrame?
Yeah, I think maybe that was the LCATS presentation that maybe that's referring to. And, you know, just thinking about that, I think there was a few different things that came out of that presentation that stood out to me. One, I think there was a quick note about the differences in the key classes for RDA versus BibFrame, and a note about the hub and the opus, but that there's not sort of wrapped in with wider standardization. This is one of the points we're, I think, getting at with our presentation here, is that we have to have a way to sort of harness some of these pieces of innovation and have either like a standards community to apply them for a more universal application. The other, in terms of the different mappings between them, I suppose my commentary would be that perhaps it's a little too binary in a sense. So with application profiles in Sinopia, you can make use of RDA properties. So you can have a lookup and use RDA unconstrained properties to describe things. So the mappings where there's a lot of RDA entities that aren't supported by BibFrame, this isn't necessarily a problem, right? You have a framework to work with for description, and you can make use of other things in your data set as well. So I suppose my commentary on that would be that we need to use the tools together. And I think, having, speaking from personal experience within the ShareVD community, because there's been quite a mix of different user communities there, from those in PCC to others in Europe, those that are very interested in more strict adherence to RDA, and those that perhaps less so, or the 3R. It's brought together ideas to really test it with the data and move forward together to bring it into a more comprehensive approach. That being said, although there's many institutions in ShareVD, it's still a subset of libraries, right? So this speaks to the question of standardization and what the community is and how we define it. I don't know if you want to add anything, Abigail.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are all good points. One of the things I would like to see is more actual testing of the data in production. So to know, how we might need to incorporate RDA in a way to support those LRM user tests, because we do want to be, doing this for our users to be able to reap the benefits of a more comprehensive ability to describe and access resources. So, I think both in the RDA, RDF sense and the BibFrame sense, figuring out where that ideal implementation is to fulfill those needs.
Mauro, the microphone.
Yes, sorry. Maybe some other words about RDA 3R for the Mark 21 BF community, or no, if that's okay? If you want, of course.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I think perhaps I was trying to sort of comment on both questions at once. I suppose a lot of it remains to be tested. That's where I look forward to that process for the work at the PCC. It's been a reflective process thinking about this. So I was heavily involved with implementation in Ontario back before I moved to Alberta for the initial RDA, training for it and what have you. And of course, very, very optimistic about its application and working through how we can work with it in Mark over the course of the past decade. And it's encouraging to think about being able to use it to its greater potential. So on one hand, I do see a lot more potential there, because as we've gone through our various projects here, even in terms of instruction in library school, because we've done some sessions in classes here for our students, the ability to sort of demonstrate concepts embedded in RDA that have been quite complex to grasp in the past, by walking them through with actual data with BibFrame and being able to show them how you can catalog with it in a much more real way, and has made things much easier, and it's been very encouraging. But we're still, in terms of RDA and particularly the 3R, I think I really see the benefit of it in a linked data environment. And there, in combination with BibFrame, we're really just having the chance to begin using it, to begin testing it. And this is lovely. I mean, it's a great place to be in. But now we get to test it with real world data.
Thank you, Jan.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other question from the speakers, for example? Okay. And now I'm introducing Philip Schörer. Is Associate University Librarian from Technical and Access Services at Stanford University. The title of his paper is I'm as Good as You. The Death of Expertise Entity Management in the Age of the Internet. Please, Philip.
Thank you so much. And I'm very pleased to be closing out today's presentations with more of a philosophical approach to the questions that we're talking about today. So in 2017, Tom Nichols published a book entitled The Death of Expertise, The Campaign Against Established Knowledge and Why It Matters. In his book, Nichols details how the rise of the information age through the ubiquitous presence of the internet has created a misguided sense of intellectual egalitarianism. The focus of Nichols' book is on the political arena, but it doesn't take much of a shift to see how his observations might be applied to the movement towards linked open data within the library world. With the rise of Google and Wikidata as authoritative sources of information for many, and linked data as the new global means of communication for the semantic web, the structuring and dissemination of data has become politicized. Wikipedia, and by extension Wikidata, is the free encyclopedia that anyone can edit. So too with metadata assignment and identifier creation within them. There's no need for a master's in library science. No need to comprehend the Paris principles or the new library reference model. No need to understand the requirements of resource description and access on label creation. In his book, Nichols includes a quote by the devil from C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters. I'm as good as you, the devil says, is a useful means for the destruction of democratic societies. As libraries embrace the transition to linked open data and the freedom it creates, what ultimately will become the balance of trust and provenance between established knowledge and a more populist approach to identity management? Nichols wrote most of his book during the year 2016, and it was indeed a very tumultuous year. 2016 was the year of the Rio Olympics, at a time of political instability and economic crisis in Brazil. A time when another virus, the Zika virus, was spreading worldwide. 2016 was the year when Pokemon Go swept the world, when people in California were so fascinated by this virtual reality game that they walked off cliffs and fell into the ocean staring at their iPhones. 2016 was the year when, after 43 years of membership, the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union and the European Atomic Energy Community. And perhaps most shockingly, at least to those in the United States, Donald Trump was elected president. Populism, a political approach that stresses the importance of the ordinary person who feels that they are being ignored by the establishment, was definitely on the rise worldwide. And although this movement may have been most apparent in politics, it has been expressed in many other venues as well. From the commoditization of education, to the People's Choice Awards in entertainment, to the use of alternative facts and confirmation bias to support almost any viewpoint. Turning to our topic for today, bibliographic control in the digital ecosystem, the shift towards a more open approach to the management of library data can be traced, among other roots, to libraries' interest in linked open data as the new medium of communication of the semantic web. In 2011, Stanford University Libraries and the Council on Libraries and Information Resources held a week-long conference on the prospects for a large-scale, multinational, multi-institutional prototype of a linked data environment focused on libraries and the resources of most need to them. From the very beginning, the interest was in this open global ecosystem. Linked open data was favored for being a natural extension to the collaborative sharing models historically employed by libraries. By making use of an identifier as the mechanism for linking and not the name or text string, with all the complex rules for creation that that process implies, a more democratic approach to metadata creation is made possible. Perhaps the most powerful summary of the Stanford Conference is encapsulated in its manifesto for linked libraries. First, publishing data on the web for discovery and use, rather than preserving it in dark, more or less unreachable archives that are often proprietary and profit-driven. Second, continuously improving data and linked data, rather than waiting to publish perfect data. And third, structuring data semantically, rather than preparing flat, unstructured data. Fourth, collaborating rather than working alone. Fifth, adopting web standards rather than domain-specific ones. And sixth, using open, commonly understood licenses rather than closed and/or local licenses. Although this manifesto is focused on linked libraries, the tenets propose to open the process of data creation to the web, semantically structure data according to web standards, and by implication, work collaboratively with a growing association of global, non-library partners making use of those same standards. Through these actions, libraries are encouraged to re-examine their processes for bibliographic and authority metadata creation to join a global movement that was rapidly passing them by. Other library initiatives in the past decade have accelerated libraries' movement down this more integrative pathway. At virtually the same time as the Stanford Conference, the Library of Congress announced the creation of the Bibliographic Framework Initiative, or BibFrame, to integrate with and engage in the wider information community and still serve the very specific needs of libraries. Linked Data for Production, or LD4P, focused on the transition of basic technical services workflows from their current infrastructure built on MARC to linked open data and the semantic web. And the Share Virtual Discovery Environment, or Share VDE, developed as a library-driven initiative to draw together the bibliographic and authority data of the community of libraries into a collaborative environment following the principles of linked data. However, all of these library initiatives had a common thread tying them together. They were looking to translate the mission of libraries and the work they do into the language of the web. Now, the key word here is translate. They were not looking to re-examine or redefine the basic tenets of what libraries stood for, simply to re-articulate this mission in a modern context. Focusing on the world of metadata creation and authorities, libraries still claimed expertise in the creation of consistent, integrated, and high-quality data. It was its means of creation and diffusion that had changed. Outside of libraries, however, this period was also home to a more egalitarian approach to knowledge creation and dissemination. There is no doubt that resources such as Wikipedia have taken deep root in many aspects of our knowledge ecosystem. From its start in 2001 until approximately 2007, Wikipedia grew exponentially. And even though growth has declined since this point, as of December 19, 2020, Wikipedia had over 6 million articles. Although discouraged in academic settings, Wikipedia is still considered one of the most important, freely accessible sources of information on the web. And now with additional wiki initiatives, such as Wikibooks, free textbooks and manuals, Wikiversity, free learning resources, and Wikinews, free content news, the Wiki family is extending its reach. Wikidata, a translation of much of the knowledge of Wikipedia into a machine actionable form, has become critically important to many artificial intelligence developments. As of January 2021, Wikidata had encoded over 90 million concepts and made them freely available. But how and where does the library's more traditional culture of metadata creation and dissemination fit into such populist movements? The creation of descriptive metadata has never been as carefully guarded as that of authorities. Libraries have long been interested in pushing descriptive metadata creation up the chain of resource acquisition. For instance, descriptive metadata created by publishers, often to support acquisitions and ordering functions, may become the short-term data of record for libraries with limited cataloging staff. And in some cases, especially if the resource is in a language the library cannot easily handle, the descriptive metadata may become semi-permanent. But authorized headings, such as names and subjects, are not so easily created or assigned. The creation of name authorities, such as for authors or corporate bodies, and the assignment of authorized subjects are restricted to the professional metadata staff within an organization. Although paraprofessional staff may add an unverified name heading or subject keywords, they are tagged as unauthorized through such mechanisms as authority vendor validation or in the MARC coding itself. While not requiring a master's degree in library science, the ability to create new authorized access points almost always requires extensive training through a recognized training program such as the Name Authority Cooperative or NACO in the United States. This focus on training and review, of course, has its downsides as well. Because of the focus on the quality of individual headings, output is low. But are the goals of Wikidata and libraries similar? In a linked data sense, Wikidata hopes to assign a unique identifier to each unique entity. But even this uniqueness is not essential. If multiple identifiers are discovered for the same entity, they can simply be linked as they are discovered. This ability to focus on quick identification, together with the possibility of linking redundant identifiers, allows for the rapid expansion of the system. An authority record, however, serves multiple functions. In addition to uniquely identifying an entity, it prescribes a preferred label for that entity, structured in a very prescribed way. It can also include alternative headings, cross-references, or citations, all created according to detailed instructions. Although fulfilling the same identifying function, the authority record supplies much more information that is often crucial to traditional library systems and discovery environments. As the world shifts to the semantic web as its primary information source, and the underlying structure of the web relies on the linking of identifiers to make the data understandable to machines, how will the closed world of library authorities and the open world of web identifiers be harmonized? This crucial boundary layer is being explored in the United States by the Program for Cooperative Cataloging, or PCC. Within the PCC, The BibCo program defines the parameters for record creation. According to the preface of the BibCo Standard Record RDA Metadata Application Profile, authority records must support authorized access points in a BibCo record. In addition, these guidelines refer the user to the OCLC bibliographic formats and standards for specific instructions on how to create those authorities. In the section of these standards on the creation of original cataloging, referring to the primary access point or the 1XX fields in MARC, the instructions state, for cataloging in English, search the LC NACO authority file and use the established forms of names and preferred titles found there. If not found, construct the access point according to RDA or AACR2. In other words, for original cataloging in the MARC formats, an authority record in the LC NACO authority file is implied for those controlled headings. It is the ability and expertise to work within this authority file that becomes one of the requirements for the creation of a legitimate BibCo standard record. In 2016, the PCC charged a task group on identity management and the Name Authority Cooperative, or NACO, to support, in particular, the acceleration towards ubiquitous identifier creation and identity management at the network level. While acknowledging that traditional library authority control has not been supplanted in current library discovery systems, the charge recognizes that use cases for identity management have grown dramatically in recent years. Recognizing that the library's traditional role to authority control has focused on unique strings of characters, the charge includes an excellent question. As strings lose their function as the primary bearers of uniqueness, but continue to have value as human readable information, what is necessary to facilitate separating display needs from back-end functionality? In other words, does a primary value of an authority come from its uniqueness of its label for display purposes in a discovery system, or rather the linking it can create? Or are those two functions separable? And is it the ability to make this link which demands the expertise, or is the expertise required for the correct formation of the label and descriptive bibliographic data and tagging? In May of 2018, the charge to this task group was expanded. Among other issues, the group was asked to develop a pilot using identifiers in place of or in addition to text strings, and to explore policy and governance issues related to participation in non-PCC programs such as ORCID and Wikidata. Among other things then, the group is exploring that shared space devoted to identity management between the world of library experts and a growing number of more open communities with similar goals. And also exploring how there can be a common sense of trust and provenance between these two worlds. In late August of 2020, the task group proposed a Wikidata pilot to further advance these goals. The pilot is meant to compare the use and benefits of using Wikidata as opposed to other registries, such as the LC name authority file, to assess the productivity and quality assurance tools that exist, and to learn about the culture of the Wikidata community. There are over 70 cultural heritage institutions participating in this pilot worldwide. As an example, Stanford University will also be participating in this project. We have 3 specific goals in mind. The first involves the creation or editing of Stanford-specific entities, such as professors or departments or interdisciplinary centers in Wikidata, embracing Wikidata as home to authoritative identifiers for these entities. The second project involves the use of Wikidata to create a database of information about the Stanford Library's collection of Middle Eastern movie posters, following the data structure established for the Wikidata Wiki Project Performing Arts project based in Switzerland. And the third, using Wikidata items with those recorded, matching Wikidata items for those recorded in more traditional authority sources, such as the LCNAME authority file, for motion pictures held at Stanford. This project will ensure that these motion pictures are represented both in Wikidata and LCNAF, and that the identifiers for one are represented in the other, thereby closely interlinking these two sources of information. These three projects then, and dozens more described in the Wikidata pilot, are exploring trust and provenance in identity management between libraries and more community-driven organizations. Although these projects focus on library experts, use of new tools intended for a much broader community to entity management, it actually does much more than this. By making this a publicly accessible project embedded in the Wiki community, it also raises the awareness and expertise of the broader Wiki community in alternative approaches to entity management. By blending the approaches in identity management between these two communities, by enhancing trust and provenance, by blending the communities themselves, the "I'm as good as you" statement quoted by the devil in C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters becomes more of an encouraging, "You're as good as us." Near the death of expertise, Nichols includes a quote from Andrew Sullivan in reference to Donald Trump. And his quote is, "The political establishment may be battered and demoralized, deferential to the algorithms of the web and to the monosyllables of a gifted demagogue. But this is not the time to give up on America's near unique and stabilizing blend of democracy and elite responsibility." Given today's discussion, I would reinterpret this quote as follows. Libraries may be battered and demoralized, deferential to the algorithms of the web, but this is not the time to give up on libraries' near unique and stabilizing blend of community and responsibility. By taking their expertise and reaching out to the world through such communities as Wiki, by embracing and becoming part of that community, libraries can truly find their place in the global world of the semantic web. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you so much. And just a question for you. From Jason Amberstone. Can you read the question, Philip?
Yes, I see the question. Disambiguation is a machine operation as well as a human need. Do you think there is a disconnect between the democratization of the semantic web and the expertise needed to actually put the infrastructure together? Any comments are useful. Thank you. I think what is interesting to me, there was a company maybe a decade or so ago with the unfortunate name of Freebase, but it was about the use of machine algorithms and humans to be able to do disambiguation. And it was a company that was bought out by Google. So what I found interesting about that approach was that it was a combination of machine and human. So they would use machine algorithms to do the disambiguation, but whenever there was an actual, to a certain level of reliability. And when it got to the point where the machine could not actually do the differentiation, they had human beings voting on whether two things were the same or not. And then the winning votes would be used to be able to link the things or not link the things. So it was a very interesting combination of both human and machine to be able to do disambiguation. I think there was I heard a presentation once by the main architect at Google on how they pull together profiles on people within the information that's in Google. And the way they would do it would be, they thought that they could very easily pull together an identity for somebody, but often people had various identities. So for instance, for myself, I used to show pug dogs and I was a music librarian and I write on linked data. So then Google thought that they could very easily create an identity for those 3 separate personas, and then they would present them to me, and I would have the ability to be able to link them together or not link them together. So again, I think it's this combination of machine and human which can often make for the best results.
Thank you. Any other question, please? Perfect. The session ends now, but I would like to ask to the speakers if they agree, if you agree, to open your web camera for a picture together of the section of today, if you want, of course. Renate? Giovanni? Laura? Perfect. Okay. Laura, can you make the picture? Okay.
Okay.
Perfect. The picture in the digital area, of course. And thank you to all the speakers, of course, and thank you to who joined to us to the conference. And the conference continues tomorrow at 3 o'clock p.m. Central European time, but we will connect at 2:30 p.m. for text, for everything, questions and other things. And now we screen all the videos again of our promoters and partners of the conference. Thank you again to all, and see you tomorrow afternoon in Italy, in Europe, in the morning in the United States, and the evening in other parts of the world. Bye-bye. Thank you again. Close your web camera.
La Biblioteca Nazionale di Firenze ha sede in un edificio inaugurato nel 1935, ma la sua origine risale al 1714, quando Antonio Magliabechi donò la sua libreria privata alla cittadinanza. Unita alla Biblioteca Palatina nel 1861, nel 1885 assume la qualifica di Biblioteca Nazionale Centrale. Possiede oltre 6 milioni di volumi, 3 milioni di opuscoli, 430.000 titoli seriali, 25.000 manoscritti e quasi 1 milione di autografi, e inoltre ricca di raccolte di musica stampa e di risorse grafiche. Grazie al deposito legale, esercita il controllo bibliografico sulle pubblicazioni italiane, realizza la bibliografia nazionale italiana, cura gli strumenti impiegati nell'indicizzazione del soggetto, si occupa di risorse digitali e della loro conservazione nel lungo periodo. Con la Biblioteca Nazionale di Roma è uno dei principali poli del Servizio Bibliotecario Nazionale.
The library at the European University Institute in Florence, Italy, enhances the research of an international community of about 1,500 members between PhD researchers, postdoctoral fellows, and professors in the social sciences. To this day, its collections count more than 500,000 books, 500,000 e-books, 365 databases, 107,000 e-journals. The EUI Research Repository, CADMOS, collects, preserves, and provides access to the EUI research outputs, including datasets, according to the EUI Open Access Policy. As an OCLC member, the EUI Library contributes with its cataloguing records to WorldCat to maintain its holdings and to make its collections visible.
The Central Institute for the Union Catalog, based in Rome, coordinates national activities dedicated to cultural heritage through solid technology and a team of professionals powering databases and services to the benefit of the whole library community.
Qui all'ICCU lavoriamo ogni giorno con passione per la valorizzazione del patrimonio, ispirandoci al futuro.
How do you define success? Is it improved educational outcomes? Contributing valuable resources that support student learning and research? How about return on investment? Understanding student and faculty needs and exceeding expectations? Or what about innovation? Providing experiences that enhance learning, but also inspire. At OCLC, our sole focus is helping you on your journey to success. That's it. And WorldShare Management Services is designed to empower your goals. Workflows are up to 4 times faster, creating bandwidth for your team to increase impact where it matters. Actionable analytics support your vision for a culture of academic achievement. And powerful group functionality encourages active collaboration. Your users are always center stage, with an intuitive experience that lets staff, students, and researchers focus on doing amazing things. You define your library's journey to success. WorldShare Management Services helps you get there.